Hey everybody. On this episode of the podcast, I sat down with Greg Wrenn. Greg is a really interesting guy. He reached out to me a while back. He recently published a book called Mothership, which is a really beautiful account of his life. He experienced a lot of PTSD in his life, PTSD, and that really drove him on a journey of beginning to work through that, overcome it. And a big part of his journey was working with the plant medicine ayahuasca. So in the book, he talks a lot about both of those. We spoke about that on the podcast. Also his interest in the coral reefs, in oceans, and just his story and his healing journey in general. So it was a really beautiful episode. He has a lovely presence, and I think you all will really gain a lot from this episode. I believe when this episode is released, myself and my colleague Marav Artsy will be in Dieta in Portugal, although we still may have a spot or two open for the second week if that is interesting to anyone. After that, we'll be in Canada continuing our work. So if anyone is interested in working with these sacramental plants, doing Dieta, going into a deep process of experiential healing and learning from the plants, that's a really beautiful opportunity. You can find out more on my website, which is nicotianarustica.org, and Marav's site, tobaccodiet.com. I'll put a link to both of those in the show notes. And then, as always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help to me. It's really what allows me to continue bringing on these guests and doing these episodes. Patreon is a really beautiful way. It's a website. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. There's different tiers you can sign up for. Those tiers give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. To all of the patrons, to all of the people supporting that way, as always, thank you very much for your support. It really means a lot. If you're not able to do that, as always, just doing some of the really small things to help with the algorithms is really helpful. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, subscribing, liking the videos, turning on the notification bell, leaving any questions or comments in the comments section, all of those things really help. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review is also very helpful. So I think that's it. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Greg.
Running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out from the maze today. I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
Well, great, Greg. Well, thank you for coming on. You reached out to me, it was a few months ago, and I think, at least on my end, I was a bit busy, and I think you as well. I had a look at your story, and we were speaking a little bit before, but I think you're doing really, really good work, really, really great work, and just bringing your story out to the public, plans, what you've done with just your interests, water and life. And I think it's something that also in this day and age, a lot of people are kind of going on this inward journey, struggling with issues in their lives, looking for other solutions, turning to plants. And so I thought you had a really interesting story and a really beautiful way of being. You also just wrote a book, so it's a good time to be interviewed. So I'm sure there'll be some people interested in looking at that. Yeah. So, I wouldn't be surprised if some people listening have heard of you, but I would imagine that the majority haven't. So maybe to start, if you can just tell a little bit about yourself, who you are, about your background, and also what kind of led you up to this point in your life where you're writing a book and coming on podcasts, sharing. I know it's always a huge question, so you can also really take it.
No. Sure. Well, Jason, thank you again for having me on, and it's a real honor to be here. and I'm Greg Wrenn. I'm the author of Mothership, a memoir of wonder and crisis, and it came out about 3 weeks ago, and the audiobook is about to come out too. But all that's exciting. But in terms of who I am a poet. I'm a professor. I'm an English professor. Um, I've been a student of ayahuasca since 2019. I am a trauma survivor. Um, I'm a queer man. I live here in Virginia in the Shenandoah Valley, although originally I'm from the state of Florida. Um, and I wrote this book. People ask, what was your strategy, or what was your plan, your blueprint for writing this book? And um and I have to say it it came about very spontaneously, um in the sense that, that this book is about turning to endangered coral reefs and ayahuasca to heal complex PTSD, which also awakened my ecological conscience in the process. So that's kind of what it's about. So, ayahuasca as trauma medicine as well as eco sacrament. Um, and so, how did I get to that point? I mean, 10 years ago, when I first thought I was writing this book, um, I would never have dreamed, first off, that I would be ingesting psychedelics. I grew up in a very kind of, um, kind of like the Nancy Reagan era, just say no. And so, I didn't even start working with um, cannabis until my sort of mid 30s. And I'm not much of a drinker. So, you know, it's I guess as much of a surprise to me as anyone else that I've written this book. But I think that, this book came about because I worked with ayahuasca. First, ultimately because I worked with ayahuasca, and we know that ayahuasca is an anti-amnesic. It helps us remember things. And so working with ayahuasca gave me, and I'm sure many of your listeners will understand this, it gave me a lot of material to work with, a lot of material from the past. And so, as someone who was ostensibly writing a nonfiction book about the climate crisis, suddenly I had all this personal material, and I saw that my personal material and this sort of ecological environmental journalism that I was doing, that they came together, because this Greek word oikos, this is something I really want to highlight today. This Greek word oikos, it's not just a yogurt that's sold in the United States in little cups, right? It's a Greek word that means home. And um, that is the source of that prefix eco, ECO. And so, so you can see how the ecological is the personal, the ecological is the familial. And I was abused as a kid until I was almost not a kid, until I was almost an adult. And so um, this pairing of the ecological and the personal, the familial and the environmental, is is a really potent one for me. And I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but that's kind of the general lay of the land in terms of who I am, um and what brought me to write this kind of crazy book. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's just kind of wild. But the journey's been wild. So what can I say?
So you speak a lot about this in the book, and when you're introducing yourself, you mentioned this idea that you were a trauma survivor, and and also with this, as always, only feel speak about what you feel comfortable with and what you
Mm.
involved. I think even, a lot of these psychological terms like trauma or PTSD, they're much more in the vernacular now, society
Yes.
at large. I think even 10, 20, certainly 30 years ago, these weren't words that people had heard, or if they spoke about trauma, it was something that was far away. It was something that happened maybe in war. Even then, it wasn't necessarily really spoken about. I think words like trauma have really become uh, common words that people are familiar with, and especially if
Hmm.
anyone is familiar with psychology or plant medicine or any form of healing, it's words
Hmm.
that are very common.
Yeah.
Maybe even the pendulum is swung the other direction where everyone has, trauma,
Oh
which
yeah.
to a degree is true. We all do have trauma, but certainly there are varying degrees of that. But when you introduced yourself, and one of the things you speak a lot about in your book is this idea of trauma. I think people much more now are realizing how trauma can shape people's lives. Um,
Hmm.
so when you're introducing yourself as a trauma survivor, why is that such an important thing to you? Why is it something that
Hmm.
you do? Because it's always interesting when we
Right.
introduce who we are. It was one of kind of the three or four things you said, and obviously it's a big part of your
Yeah.
book as well. So um, maybe if you can just go into a little more, it doesn't have to be detailed, but what that means to you,
Sure.
that idea, and why you
Sure. Sure. Well, I should say I'm also a scuba diver. And I'm also a scuba diver, and I'm a husband, and lots of things. And so I think, um, I think in a kind of public facing way, I do use the word survivor. I do say I'm a trauma survivor in that public facing way, like on a podcast. But in the book, I talk about how that story of calling myself a survivor, calling myself a trauma survivor, even calling myself an addict, right? To keep saying that over and over at a certain point, at a certain point in one's journey, in my journey, it's no longer helpful. So I said that in this public facing way. I said I'm a trauma survivor, but in my heart, I'm not a survivor. I'm a prevailer, because I didn't just survive. I prevailed. The fact that I'm alive, the fact that I wrote this book is testament to the fact that I did more than survive. And so I know exactly what you're talking about, because I think this word trauma, it's a bit like the word friend. You know, it's like Susie Q and I are friends on Facebook. Um, you know, so even the word friend has been um, so overused and so corrupted that it's not even meaningful anymore so much as it used to be. Like even 30 years ago, like I would say, if I said someone was my friend, it had some real import to it. And so yes, uh, my package arrived a week late. I'm so traumatized. I was cut off in traffic. It was so traumatic. I mean, my students, right, working with Gen Z students, my students use this word like it's um you know uh barbecue sauce at a cookout. Like it's just used, is overused. And so we have to really think about, okay, what really is trauma? Trauma is trauma results in a part of ourselves being diminished seemingly forever. Now, mammals are easily traumatized. They are easily traumatized. But your typical mammal is facing existential threats every day. We aren't, by and large, as in the developed world. Given the kind of lives that we live, we're not facing an existential threat on a day-to-day basis. And so, um, I and I think a lot of people, like, if you can't get over a breakup, that doesn't mean you have PTSD, right? And so, or if you're sad about where the planet is going, if you have eco anguish, eco anxiety, eco sadness, that doesn't mean you have a disorder. That doesn't mean you have generalized depression, major depressive episode or something like that, and you need to be thrown on Zoloft. Like, it's very important, to use these words a bit more mindfully and selectively and thoughtfully, because they do kind of lose their meaning. So that when I say I'm a trauma survivor, people might go, "Oh, there we go again. Here, another one." Who isn't a trauma survivor? And yeah, my mom abused me until I was almost an adult. And I go into some detail about that in the book. And I'm pretty sure I know what my mom did to me counts as abuse and was traumatic. But that doesn't make me special. That doesn't make me special at all, because, and this is one of the points of this book, is that I'm offering my life up as an example. It's, in a sense, my life is an algebraic variable, and I want my readers to be able to plug in their trauma, their distress, their impossible situation into that. I want them to take that their experience and sort of plug it in to that algebraic variable, and perhaps a roadmap for healing for them can be, can be inspired by that. So I just think that, at a certain point in that space of non-duality, that DMT, that ayahuasca, that so many of these medicines bring us to, that's where language falls away. And so trauma, survivor, friend, enemy, all of these concepts, all these words, they just fall away. And there's presence, there's being. And that's not evasiveness. That's not repression. That's not denial of truth, because that non-duality, that place of no words and no concepts, is very true. It's just as true as what my mom did to me, right? And so, I think what I'm encouraging folks to do, when they're ready, is to really let go of the storyline. No matter what your situation is, let go of the storyline and bask in the glory of now. And because we have to move on. At a certain point, we have to move on. And I reached the point where I do want to move on. So, hi, I'm Greg Wrenn, and I'm a prevailer. It's nice to meet you, listeners.
So in your journey, were there kind of pivotal moments? I mean, for example, I would imagine there was some moment where you realized something is wrong, like
Yeah,
something that's in my life isn't normal, and that's often a big
right.
step, because obviously, as a child, we don't necessarily know vis-a-vis other people what's right or what's wrong, because our whole world is just present, so we don't have that
Mm-hmm.
kind of outside perspective. And then also, often a very pivotal moment for people is when they decide to seek help in some way, whether
Mm-hmm.
that's through someone else, through their own internal, like, hey, like, I need to change, because often very severe trauma, it has so many effects: depression, anxiety, panic attacks, suicide. It's often, in many ways, in the extreme, it can be a death sentence. Um, so were there moments in your life where there was some kind of pivotal awakening? Was it kind of an aha moment? Like, what was
Mm.
it that allowed you to now really do what you've done?
Well, there are lots of moments I could choose. Um, but there's several moments I could choose, but I think I want to highlight the importance of the facilitators who were present at my early ceremonies with ayahuasca. So we know that on these medicines, the mind becomes much more malleable, much more coachable. The default mode network is quieting down. Our sense of self relaxes a little bit. We're more open. We're more impressionable, and when we're ready to change. And I showed up ready to change. I showed up in the Amazon essentially as a psychiatric patient, not as a thrill seeker, not as a tourist, as a patient, as a psychiatric patient. I was ready because otherwise I knew I was going to die. And so, I think about the ayahuasca center I went to in the beginning, and that was a place called Dream Glade, which is really fantastic. Went there in 2019, and this was the second night. This was the second ceremony. No, excuse me. It was the third ceremony, and I went to the bathroom. This was towards the end of the ceremony. I went to the restroom, went to the bathroom, spent a long time in there, and then came out, and one of the facilitators was sitting out there in a plastic chair. And I started to tell him my story. And he got really bored. He got really bored, and he started yawning. And I'm sharing some pretty like really traumatic things, right? And I loved that. Looking back, I loved that he was bored, because you know what? I was bored too. I was tired of prosecuting my parents aloud for the billionth time. And enough. I spent 20 years in therapy. So that, his because he's heard it all, right? This man who created this center, not to make money, no way, not to make money, but to help a world in crisis, to give back to the planet, that had the Mother Earth that had saved his own life, probably. That his indifference, his yawning, I'm so glad he didn't hold that back, because it was so instructive. And then it deepened, right? And I talked to another facilitator soon after, and I told more about my story, but it came down to, essentially, as people will learn in the book, forgiveness is the way. Forgiveness is the path. Forgiveness is the North Star. And you are not going to transform this trauma, this pain, into true compassion if you do not aspire to forgive, right? Just and to not even aspire to forgive, like just decide I am going to forgive. And I know that goes against the grain of so much thinking out there, but I had been stewing in this traumatic material and traumatic storylines for so long. And to hear from the facilitator, essentially, why not just forgive? And once you forgive, you will be bulletproof. You'll be bulletproof. No one or nothing can hurt you. And so because once you forgive, you're acknowledging that this small, whiny, neurotic, yes, wounded self is just a tiny sliver of who you really are. And to forgive is to acknowledge the infinitude that you contain, and to acknowledge the infinitude with which you are and which you contain. That then you are bulletproof, because you can kill me, you can kill my body, but you can't kill my soul. And so that, you can't kill the basic goodness that's in us. You can't kill that. It endures. It's eternal. And so that that was a really huge paradigm shift. And I am eternally grateful to the people at Dreamglade, and eternally grateful too to another curandera that I worked with uh, in the United States. And I profile her at large in the book. Her name is Alana, and she would say to me, less talking, more feeling. Less talking, more feelings. The chatter of the ego, just stop talking. Feel. Go from here to here. And when you stay here, you train to be here and not let yourself run off, then you can't help but loosen the grip on that story of I'm a survivor. I was abused. I trauma this, trauma that. Yes, all those things were true, but it's more that we prevail, that we prevail, and we have a lot to offer, because I think trauma survivor, that kind of, to me, when I say that phrase, it's like there's so much constriction in that. There's so much almost stay away from me world to that. But to say prevailer, it's like, wow, I'm prevailing, and meanwhile, I'm not in my addictive patterns. I'm not ruminating so much, and I'm here to unleash my gifts. We're all here to unleash our gifts and offer what needs to be offered to a planet in crisis. So I think, and all that goes against the grain a lot of sort of talk therapy, which, by the way, didn't do a whole lot to help me in the end. It goes against the grain of the kind of the psychological industrial complex. And hallelujah, hallelujah. Like, it's just, it is what it is. You just, at a certain point, you just gotta put it in the trash can and take it out to the street.
So you were, yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. There's a number of points I'd like to come back to with that.
Sure.
You so you were in conventional therapy or talk therapy,
Mm-hmm.
psychotherapy. What led you, as you said, 20 years of that, and you said it wasn't enough. What was that impetus that then opened you to plant medicine, and specifically to ayahuasca? Was there a promise? Was there something you had read, a kind of a cure that you had heard that ayahuasca could
Mm-hmm.
make you do that? And also,
Mm-hmm.
I think for many people, less so now, but especially as you said, a child growing up in the Reagan era, that's a very foreign concept for a lot of people, and still to a lot of people all over the world. Certainly, maybe in the U.S. and Europe, it's becoming more accepted, but still, in most of the world, it's not. It's still illegal in almost all of the world. So, what was that? Was it just you were at death's door, and that was the final choice, and some promise there, or was there something that was deeply calling you? What was that jump kind of made from psychotherapy to your first ceremony?
Well, I had an unwitting, um, spontaneous, um, psychedelic experience. So I was at and I talk about this at some length in the book. And this was a huge turning point in my life. So I had not, I had never thought of really working with psychedelics. I felt I had the same stigma. For me, it was very stigmatized then. This was probably 2018, and so I went to a festival, and to make a long story short, I I flirted with a really cute guy, and I asked him if he was a shaman. I was drunk and high at the time on marijuana, and so I was like, "Are you a shaman?" And then he said, "Yes, I am." And so then he took me, or he didn't take me, I followed him into the forest, and he offered me some DMT, which he said, we produce in our bodies anyway, and it's probably released when we die, and it's endogenous, right? This word. And he was very calm and very compelling, and didn't want any money. It just felt really clean and easy. And I, maybe to impress him, I don't know exactly what it was. It was an absolutely gorgeous day. And I smoked some DMT with him, and he served it to me. And I had a really, really transformational experience where I saw the creator. I saw the creator, and I, all the things that I had learned and heard about in Dharma talks, because I had been on silent meditation retreats for a lot of my life, and had studied Hinduism, had studied Buddhism very intensely. All these concepts that I thought I understood, like impermanence, non-self, um, Maya, all of these different terms, like they became absolutely real in that moment. Like they were absolutely real. And so it was this, like, for maybe a minute, or for maybe a minute, all these spiritual teachings that I had heard and thought about and thought I had internalized, they became for that minute or two, they became embodied. And it blew me away. Literally blew me away. Blew me, the little me, away. And then I picked up a copy of How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, and many of your listeners, I'm sure, maybe some of them have had a similar experience where they picked up this book. Michael Pollan is this very sober, very sensible, trustworthy voice, and I didn't Google it; it just appeared in my life because a lot of people were talking about it, and I ended up reading it, and I began to connect that psychedelic experience I'd had in the forest in Tennessee with this shaman. And I began to connect that experience with some of the research that Michael Pollan was offering his readers. And, of course, a light bulb went off, and I thought to myself, wait a second, what could treat CPTSD? What I'm doing right now is not working. And I am engaging in, I have addictive compulsive behaviors that are putting me on a suicidal path. I was getting really scared, and so I ended up Googling some things, and came across this research paper by a McGill University researcher named Antonio Insera, and he put forth a hypothesis that ayahuasca might be the only pharmacological treatment for PTSD, and maybe by extension complex PTSD. And so I looked at all the research. I found it. I learned what fear extinction meant. I learned the word epigenetic, what that really meant, and what about these different receptors and this and that. And so I tried to understand the science as best I could. And then I went on Reddit, and I found the ayahuasca center with the most upvotes, and that was Dreamglade. And I booked. My fingers kind of did what they did, and I put a deposit down, and I booked the ticket, and the rest is history. So it, it was right place, right time. It was really, really divine. I consider it to be, divine orchestration, because I had prayed, I prayed for so long for some kind of release, to be saved from dying, and so that's that's how it went. And I was lucky. You know, I went to this ayahuasca center that had the most upvotes on Reddit. And I had this incredible experience and had incredible facilitators who weren't going to put up with my bullshit, who weren't going to put up with my bullshit. And they created a really safe, loving container. And when obviously as a curandero yourself, as a space holder, like you know how important that is, and so that love, that support, that tough love too, like I absorbed that, and then have continued on this path, and I'm still new to it. I'm still, I try to stay humble, because that's what Madre Ayahuasca does. She keeps you in check.
So you mentioned before, I think you said it was your second ceremony. You had this very profound experience where you were in the bathroom and the facilitator was, you were telling him your story and he yawned. And I imagine there was other ceremonies after that. At the completion of that experience, did you feel that something very profound had shifted? Was it everything was gone? Did that start you on what can be called like an integrative experience where you really had to begin to change your life? Did you not feel anything? What was that like for you? Because I think for most people that's quite a huge experience, going down to the jungle, sitting in a group, hearing screaming, working in with this very different substance, going into altered states. It's even just the experience itself can be quite life changing for people. But obviously, then what happens after that is also very, very different, very unique.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh! I mean, yes. I mean, being in the dark with strangers, with this singing that no offense at all, no disrespect at all to Shipibo people, but some of the singing is not exactly it's not always uplifting sounding. Like to my ears, some of it sounded quite foreboding, and it's being spoken in the Shipibo language, and so I really thought sometimes I was on a spaceship, and I really thought that the two incredible Shipibo curanderos, Raul and Lydia, who are first cousins. I mean, I really during these journeys, I really thought that they were aliens, and but sometimes you need an extraterrestrial to show you the way, as we've learned for movies like Arrival and E.T. and others. And so, they were channeling the plants. They were channeling the earth. And so that is an alien in a sense, relative to humanity. That is an alien presence. That is extra human, so to speak. And so, oh my gosh, I was scared shitless, literally. Like I pooped the mattress at one point. Not anyway. It was all liquid. Let's put it that way. But in any case, it was poop. And so a lot came up for me. So really, to answer your question, I think by the end of that third ceremony, I write about this in Mothership. By the end of that third ceremony, I saw the lid. I don't call it the lid in the book, but I saw the lid. I knew there was a lid. I knew there was a lid. I could see the lid. I could touch the lid, but I was not ready to open the lid. So this whole notion of one and done that some people have out there, like, oh, I can work with ayahuasca one time and turn water into wine or something, and go from, and erase everything from the past. I mean, that's all. I think in my experience, that's a fantasy. No, by the end of those three ceremonies, I saw the lid on the container in my head, and I was afraid to open that lid. I didn't really want to know what was behind what was, like in Ghostbusters where they keep the ghosts in that little box. I didn't want to open that box. I did not want to open it. And so, but that was enough for then. Like it was enough for me to know that there was a lid, and that I could at a certain point open it, but I was not ready to open it. But I will say for me, and maybe this will help some of your listeners, and some of your listeners may have done this also. But so I went from the jungle after my ceremonies in the rainforest. I left the jungle and I went to the Andes. I went uh, to Huaran. I went to Pisac, and I worked with a fantastic Huachuma facilitator named Bernard, and you may have heard of him. And
on the podcast, he's a
he has. Oh my gosh! To integrate the ayahuasca experience with Huachuma, so much love, so much love, so much love, so much love. During the day in his garden. Again, he's not someone who wants to hear the whole story. Less talking, more feeling. His tough love, I absorbed that, and that really helped me. And I talked to him about the lid a little bit, this traumatic material that I knew I was holding back. And he gave me some really good guidance to just be patient and work with this. But I worked with Bernard, and that was extremely, extremely helpful because I needed some love then. I was very scared. I had regressed to being a kid, and there was abusive flashbacks coming up to some extent, and so it really helped to work with him and work with that medicine. So I'm eternally grateful to him if he's listening. I don't know if he remembers me. He may. Um, and then I, as I talk about in Mothership, I continued on my path, and I kept working with the medicine, and I found a facilitator in the United States, an underground facilitator in the United States. And, eventually, that lid opened, and I learned some things about myself, but and my family and my past. And so that journey of integration took time. It took time. Integration is so important. Nature is so important. Having just strong, loving people in your life is so important. Like I'm meeting with a friend, just thinking about Bernard, thinking about the people at Dream Glade, like Drew and Stace and Lydia and Raul. Like I'm meeting with, after we finish our talk today, I'm going to have lunch with a friend who just did a couple ceremonies, ayahuasca ceremonies, and she needs someone to talk to. Like, she's a friend of mine. She needs someone to talk through the experience with. And when she asked me, I was like, of course, because I remember how much I needed that. And so we do that for each other because she's on her own path, and I'm so proud of her. But I also know she can't do it alone. It really does take people to be there for you the way that people have been there for me. And so, because there's some, as people will learn in Mothership, there's some heavy stuff. Yeah.
So, how would you describe that difference between kind of conventional medicine, conventional therapy, more Western approaches, talk therapy, psychoanalysis, versus what could generically be called plant medicine?
Sure.
This kind of this therapy that involves potentially plants, potentially other substances, facilitators, shamans, songs, ritual. What do you find? Because you're also someone who's experienced those. So maybe from your own experience, and also I think you've done a lot of research. into these
Yes.
subjects. So what you feel are maybe the pros and cons or the differences, or how would you
Hmm.
describe the two paths?
Yes, I am familiar with a lot of the research and the science behind psychedelic therapy. There are actually 70 peer-reviewed scientific articles that are woven into into my story, because I was also trying to make sense of, well, how is this different than the old way? How is this different from talk therapy? How is this different from the big pharma approach? And so for me, I think for someone who, first off, talk therapy works for some people. Like, it's enough for some people. Zoloft even is enough for some people. I'm not going to say it's not for some people. It worked. It's enough for some people. It was not enough for me. So I think as I answer your question, I need to make it clear that so complex PTSD is the result of prolonged repeated abuse from which you cannot escape. Okay. So that means, in a nutshell, just to make it real simple, my trigger was being vulnerable with people and attempting to bond with them. For someone who has been in a war zone, a veteran, their trigger might be um, thunder or gunfire. Or if someone is in a is yeah, so for me, just the very act of bonding brought up panic, could bring up panic, flashbacks, emotional and visual, um, so on and so forth. So you can imagine that if your trigger is getting vulnerable with another person, that talk therapy is really tricky, because I'm making myself vulnerable, and then the therapist says, in the course of a session, they might say, I had a therapist tell me, I know someone you know. In fact, I know one of your students. I'm a university professor. I know one of your students. Like, completely inappropriate. Like, you nuts. Like, for a therapist to say, to breach confidentiality like that. So, or even a therapist saying something sexually, like, suggestive or provocative to me. And so, so it's like, I might be letting my guard down with a therapist. I might feel that panic, but it's okay. I feel sort of safe. And then they say something that's like beyond the pale, that, and that just sent me into a complete spiral. And I would bolt. But even something as simple as just not remembering that my mom had abused me, like, just like core things to my story, like they would just forget that, or they would forget key moments of my story, and I'd been with them for maybe a year or two. Or, I'm going to cancel the session 2 hours beforehand because I need to go to a Halloween party, and it's not like I was going in there talking about, you know, um, my boss or something. And my boss is really annoying me. Like, I was talking about some very weighty life and death kind of things with my therapist, and she needed to cancel because of a Halloween party. Or a therapist answering the phone during a session, her cell phone, and, hi, yes, oh, okay, and then hang up. It's my birthday, Greg. Sorry. Just wild things like that. Things you're not trained. You're trained to probably not do. And for some people, they could roll with that, right? I could not roll with that. I would be like, fuck off. I don't know if I can say that on YouTube. Fuck off. Okay. I would be like, fuck you. I wouldn't say that. I would say, fuck you. I'm out of here. Whereas other people might, work through it. I couldn't work through that. But even just like a strange look in their eye, a weird micro expression on their face might send me into a weird path of panic, And so my point is, talk therapy for someone like me with developmental relational trauma didn't work because no therapist felt safe enough. No therapist felt trustworthy enough. Um, Imperfection. This is the thing, right? And this is on me, right? Ultimately, imperfection for me signaled danger. It was a reminder of the core abusive relationship from my childhood, from my caregiver, from which I could not escape. So especially for me, talk therapy just didn't, I mean, it kept me afloat, but I couldn't go deep, as you might imagine. I couldn't go deep in it. So, um, and I also think that with talk therapy too, there's a business model. I mean, they want you to keep coming back. And so I feel like some of my therapists would almost unconsciously or even consciously, I don't know, they would try and stir things up in me, you know, and ask me provocative questions about my life. And then, we get to the end of the 50-minute hour. And I mean, doesn't that sound like the most ridiculous kind of um, business model, right? The 50-minute hour. It's absolutely ridiculous, right? Um, the quarter pounder that's only an eighth of a pound. Anyway, so so we'd come to the end of the 50-minute hour, and they would say, "Oh well," and I'd be in a panic, right? I would be really upset, and then they would say, "Well, we'll talk about that next time," you know. And so it just kept me coming back, and nothing was ever resolved. There was never a plan. And so it just went on forever. In other words, 2 decades. It went on for 2 decades. Thankfully, most of these people took insurance. Some of them didn't. Um, but it was at a very expensive, long 20 years with some wonderful clinicians. It wasn't the issue. It was just most of them were not, a lot of them needed more help than I did. And maybe your listeners can relate to that too. So enter plant medicine, enter ayahuasca ceremonies. This is a different model. This is a model that, as Alana says, less talking, more feeling, and setting goals and being more in the moment, and allowing because face it, like for me at least, and I think for many people, ayahuasca ceremonies are a form of exposure therapy. They expose you to they expose you to fear, panic, terror, other things, other emotions. And are you going to be able to stand in yourself as that comes up? Are you going to be able to work with that fear? Are you going to be able to tolerate that? And so what ayahuasca does that I guess ideally a great therapist does is that she creates a space in which you can feel anything, and fear extinction over time happens, right? You experience a traumatic memory enough times that it loses its panic and loses its associated fear, and you integrate that memory into your larger story without as much panic. So that I think is, Jason, one of the things that is so exciting about working with plant medicines, in my case ayahuasca, because it creates that inner exposure therapist, and you're just, I don't know, it's like even when there's panic, most of the time when I'm working with ayahuasca, I still feel the love. I still feel held. And so, to make a long story short, she's that therapist that I never, she's that therapist I always needed, but never really found. And I don't think that therapist even exists in human form, to be honest with you. And now she's inside of me. She's with me, and and she helps me out. She helps me out.
Are there, whether it's from your own experience or your research, are there other modalities for treating trauma, PTSD, CPTSD, that you find beneficial in and of themselves, or also in conjunction
Mhm.
with plant medicine?
I think therapy and plant medicine can be really, really potent. I think that can be really, really significant. because um, we know ayahuasca is a rapid antidepressant that works within 24 hours, unlike Zoloft, which might not even work at all. If it does, it might take 6 to 8 weeks. And so, you show up to so you work. So maybe you go on an ayahuasca, you take you work with the medicine on a series of ceremonies, and then maybe you go back, as you must go back to your city, your town, and you show up to therapy really differently than you did before. And so I had some really great sessions with a therapist um, while I was in PSAC, when I was living in PSAC during the pandemic, part of it. And those sessions were extremely helpful because I didn't take things as personally that he would say or didn't say, like his imperfections didn't signal danger. His imperfections signaled, oh, hey, he's human. Oh, hey, I'm human. Like, it was much more grounded. So I think that therapy in conjunction with plant medicine can be really potent. And also, I just think um, intentional time in nature can be extremely helpful for someone with CPTSD or PTSD because, you know, depending on your story, probably your triggers aren't in nature. They might be, but let's say they're not. Your triggers aren't in nature. You're by yourself, and your default mode network is relaxed. It's your sense of self is more expanded. You're in nature, and maybe you're in the Amazon even, and you've ingested ayahuasca, which came from the very rainforest that you're basking in, and you begin to feel like you are the rainforest's son. You are a student, a sibling, a cherished child of Mother Earth. And that experience for someone like me who needed to be remothered, who needed to be reparented, who needed new imprinting in that very malleable, coachable state after an ayahuasca ceremony, being in nature, those attachment centers of the brain were still lit up. And I felt an alliance. I felt an alliance with the rainforest. I felt loved by the rainforest. And I'd be in a hammock. I recommend bringing a hammock with a mosquito net and just kind of rocking in the wind in the rainforest, after a ceremony. Oh my gosh. And you'll never forget that. I'm sure you've experienced this, other people have experienced this. You'll never forget that experience, and you can tap into it. And as Rachel Harris, author of Listening to Ayahuasca, really fantastic book I'd recommend to people, says, it creates a new benchmark for feeling loved. A new benchmark for feeling loved, and you take that with you. So I do think that spending time in nature, um, working with a therapist, and then one more thing I would just say is briefly, um, just intentional relating, creative relating with other people, practicing. Right, we know these critical periods of development have been reopened. Gould Dolan is making these exciting discoveries at UC Berkeley now about this phenomenon with psychedelics. They're reopening the critical periods for social reward learning, and so if that window is open, go for it. Don't waste your time. Like, if you need to relearn how to be in relationship with people, my tendency is to sort of go and be alone, after I drink ayahuasca. But I've learned, no, Greg, you have to be practicing socializing and being with people and practicing reciprocity with people, and that too can be very, 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 very transformative in conjunction with plant medicine.
You were speaking about a really interesting topic um, when you said you went to this the ayahuasca center in your second ceremony. You said you received tough love from the facilitator, and that was very
Yeah.
beneficial for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a really interesting topic. I think even with some of the psychedelic assisted therapy, you have more of this maybe generic model, not for better for worse, but this idea that the plants do everything. You just give your client the plants, and maybe even the tough love comes from the plants, or it doesn't, or the love, but that everything is the plants. But also, what you described was kind of the secondary model, that having that human connection is also very important. Uh, it, in a way, it's also the difference between giving someone, for example, DMT versus ayahuasca, giving someone ibogaine versus iboga, which also then usually would include the song, the dance, the ritual, all of the things that go along. And that idea of tough love, that sometimes maybe, and this is, I think, in many circles a bit controversial, that sometimes not everything being in love and light or affirmation. Sometimes the opposite of that can also be, as in your case, very beneficial. On the other hand, you also mentioned some of the therapists you were working with. Sometimes maybe tough love isn't the right word, but their lack of skill in a way also exacerbated that trauma. So
Mm-hmm.
it is maybe a bit of an ambiguous question, but I guess maybe it's two parts. Like, what do you think is the difference or the benefit between only focusing on a plant itself versus focusing on the plant with a human element, with a facilitator, with someone who can maybe skillfully interlude at points, and also that difference between uh, of tough love and the importance of
Mm-hmm.
that, but also maybe where that can cross a line too to being disadvantageous to someone.
Absolutely. Well, I'm thinking about that New Yorker article about that DMT shaman in Mexico. And I think his name begins with an O. But there are people, there are curanderos or shamans out there who do have very tough love goes maybe at times too far. Um, and yeah, that would not be my jam. Um, that would not be my jam. If I feel like the if I felt like the shaman or facilitator was on a power trip, I would leave. Um, I would leave. But I do think that that's that sort of, we'll call it tough love, even abusive, pushing people to the limits, whatever you want to call it, like that kind of shaman is at one end, and then you have maybe this is sort of a maybe an incomplete continuum, but maybe on the other side you have like therapists that I had growing up, or as a in my 20s and 30s, who it was all nodding and smiling. Yes, yes. Oh, it's fine. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they could have been an animatronic. Some of them could have been animatronic, you know, critters. From Chuck E. Cheese's. Like they. I wasn't really sure that they were listening, or that they were. I don't know. I'm not sure, but there has to be. I think what can sometimes get lost in therapy is an ethical sensibility. Like saying like what you are doing is not right. Right? What you're doing is not only hurting yourself, but it is going against the very moral code you espouse. Right? And you can think about the five precepts from Buddhism. You know, don't hurt, right? Don't hurt / kill. Don't steal. Don't take what isn't yours. Don't don't um, don't commit sexual misconduct. Don't lie, right? Don't speak unkindly, and then don't be ingesting substances that lead to heedlessness, to recklessness. Like that was the moral code that I espoused, but no one ever really called me on that, and I just feel like that's the beauty of working with facilitators in plant medicine is that, we did talk about like what's right and what's wrong. Like what we talked about karma. We could talk about things like that. And we could talk about, if you think this, if you keep thinking this thought, or if you keep performing this particular action, what's that going to show up? How's that going to show up in your next ceremony 3 months from now? I wasn't afraid of the next therapy session, but I'm definitely afraid of the next ayahuasca ceremony, in the sense that there will be justice. Like, you will have to answer for the things you said, the things you did or didn't do. Like, you will have to answer for those things. You will. And you always do in life, but you just don't see it, so clearly. But with ayahuasca, you do see it. So I think that, I hope I'm answering your question, but I think that, the facilitators in plant medicine, like the human facilitators in plant medicine, are really helpful in. They've been really helpful in just being able to talk about spirituality, talk about ethics, talk about morality, talk about history, talk about all the things that I never felt like I could talk about in therapy, and yet that seemed so relevant. God, the goddess, the divine, you know, and I would know the plant facilitators' worldview, and they would know mine, but I never knew who my therapists were. So, and that's not how life works. Like, you do, like, it's weird for it to be one-sided like that. So those therapists were trying to give me a corrective experience. They were trying to reparent me, but it didn't work for me for the reasons I've said. But these plant medicines reparented me. But I think to some extent, I learned a lot from these plant medicine facilitators, and I learned, from Bernard. Like, I learned about, letting go of storylines. I learned about, I don't know, not making excuses and just doing what needs to be done. Being, balancing being a husband and a father with being a plant medicine facilitator. Like, he has a very full life, and I saw that, but he also has a life of love, and in a beautiful setting, and a life of service and connection. And so, like, these facilitators modeled ways of living that being in some windowless room in some office building with with a therapist didn't really provide me. But yeah, I think for me, as someone who has often felt very alone, who didn't feel like they could connect with people, I really needed it to be plants plus facilitators. I needed to process things. I'm verbal. Like, I like to talk through things. And so, I have the ineffable experiences. I have those beautiful experiences in the ceremonies. And then, sometimes I do want to talk about it, and they're there to support. But but these days it's the ceremonies, knock on wood, there's no telling what's next. But the ceremonies are much more shamanic. They're not so much like, I don't think of them as therapeutic, although I know they're therapeutic. They're not. I don't because I don't feel like there's a lot. I don't feel broken. Like, I don't feel broken. I know there are parts of me that need help or need upgrades or whatever, but I don't feel like I'm as broken. And so I guess I rely on those facilitators less, but certainly early on, it was essential to have just nice, caring people who stayed up until 4:30 in the morning with me, 4:30, 5:30 until the sun rose. I mean, who does that? I'll never forget those acts of service, and I aspire to, to do the same, when the situation, when the opportunity arises.
One of the interesting things about plant medicine, I find, and it may be interesting how I articulate this, but that word spirit is often used. And one of
Yeah.
the interesting things that I find, obviously in more conventional medicine, is the idea of spirit, or as you said, God or religion, is very much
Mhm.
disconnected to that. Again, not in a better or worse way. It's just it's seen as two separate ideas. And one of the interesting things that I think that you were thinking about or speaking about was also this idea, even when you were speaking about trauma, that there's always this line of, because in talk therapy, for example, we're constantly going into that, going back to it,
Mhm.
and often it becomes another layer in a way, another label that we begin to put on. It's also interesting. One of the things that you also mentioned with plant medicine is it's an anti-amnesia, meaning that it will bring, potentially will bring those things up. It will help us to remember. But also, you said something really interesting was this idea that ayahuasca also seemed to put things in a much larger perspective. That it made you feel like your story wasn't everything. That who you were was also beyond. It's a very common experience that we have where the things that we think are so important and so traumatic, if they're seen in another light, if we are in communion with spirits or God or the universe or the power of nature, it also shows us that there's also other things out there that maybe we haven't seen or not connected to, and getting in touch with those things can be so healing in and of itself, that not that it disregards or makes things not important, but it just puts it in a certain lens, a certain relativity, a reflectiveness of what actually is important in life. Do you think that's one of the real powers
Mhm.
of these plants like ayahuasca? Because on the one hand, they do seem to be very, very effective for something like PTSD. And I think for a lot of people listening, often our mind goes to, well, maybe it's rebalancing a chemical, or it's lowering the levels of my depression. But often what people describe is something beyond the rational, beyond the scientific, beyond the, oh, well, it did this, this, and this, and now it's all good. It's something that's more ephemeral, something that's maybe more in this realm of spirit or God. And, these are also words that can be very hard for people to
Yeah.
speak about. But
Right.
often, when someone comes out of an experience like that, for lack of better words, they begin speaking in terms.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I hear you. I kind of hear you as talking about awe and the power of awe to uh, the power of awe to how do I say this? Restore, um, kind of restore the right proportions. How am I trying to say this? Like, it helps put our trauma. Yeah, it helps put our trauma or our story or our life in a cosmic perspective. And once you put your life in a cosmic perspective, um, you're seeing things in more realistic proportions, right? That really my life is nothing. I'm almost nothing. I'm a speck of a speck of a speck of a speck of a speck. And the planet is a speck of a speck of a speck of a speck. The solar system is the same, maybe even our galaxy. It's like we are so tiny. We're the starfish on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean who doesn't know who Beyonce is, who doesn't know what eBay is, or a transistor radio. There's so much that we don't understand. So it's not only that we are small in terms of inches and feet, but we're small in terms of our understanding. And that place of humility, that place of awe-induced insignificance, um, is paradoxically a really, really powerful place. It's a really powerful place to be, because there's so much more surrender in that, in that positionality, I guess you could say. And come what may, if the supernova is gonna blow, it's gonna blow. If the volcano, if the super volcano is gonna erupt, it's gonna erupt. If the goddess wills this, the goddess wills this. One of my gurus says, the human proposes and the god disposes. We don't get to choose so many things. We don't get to choose those things. And that's an antidote to a lot of the narcissism, I think, that at least I was engaged in, that I was living in. Then at the same time, I think it's also important to kind of like turn this a little bit and say, well, there is also a lot of ego inflation that people can get from plant medicines. And I guess I don't know why for some people it leads them to feel all powerful and at times even ready to take advantage of people, right? There are definitely shamans out there like that, and commit misconduct. And then why for others it leads to more humility and more awe-induced insignificance. I don't know. Maybe it has to do with set and setting. But I'm proud. I'm grateful that the people that I've worked with on this path, Bernard, the people at Dreamglade, Alana, others, have been humble, and were modeling for me service, and and that they were doing it for, not for power, not for money, not for sex. They were doing it to help a world in crisis, with their own human needs attached to that, of course, right? And their own flaws and foibles, sure. But at the end of the day, there's integrity there, and we absorb that. But if you have a teacher who's maybe, or a facilitator or shaman or whatever you want to call it, that's not that maybe is working in the dark arts, then maybe maybe that can lead to some suboptimal outcomes, let's say.
In the beginning, you said that for you, ayahuasca is an eco sacrament.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people understand the idea of it being a sacrament, something that's sacred, that has this history, this story, this ritualistic aspect, that it is sacred often, for almost always for the people who traditionally work with it. I think for some people who've worked with plants like ayahuasca, they understand also that eco part, that ecology part, that it is of nature, it's from nature, it's embodying the power, the wisdom, the grace, the awe of nature. I think maybe for maybe especially for people who haven't worked with a plant like ayahuasca, that may be a bit harder to understand. Um, Another one of the things you talk a lot about in the book is also your, you could even call it a sacrament, your reverence of nature, of the reefs, of the
Mm-hmm.
ocean. How do you find those things tie together? Because I've always found it very interesting. I mean, you mentioned this climate crisis. Maybe you can also speak a bit about what that means to you. But it does seem that
Mm-hmm.
in this idea of symbiosis, of harmony, of a higher intelligence, as things like trauma become more prevalent, as people seem to be, at least emotionally, psychologically, suffering more, you can argue that the planet is suffering more. This eco sacrament is also coming out from the jungle. It's spreading, it's moving out. So, it does seem like there's a symbiosis. So what does that mean to you, the eco sacrament? What do you see with something like ayahuasca? And what do you, maybe you can speak a bit more about your experience in the ocean, your experience with locals,
Mm-hmm.
what that has taught you, and really what you learned.
That's a great question, Jason. Thank you so much. Yeah, and that kind of gets at the heart of what I ultimately want people to take away from Mothership is that we turn to these medicines to heal our personal trauma, um, and it can't stop there. I don't believe it can stop there. I don't think, given the circumstances of the world we live in, I don't think it can stop there. I think that I think it's perfectly okay to sign up for an ayahuasca ceremony, to devote a week, 2 weeks, one night on a weekend, to devote that time to planetary healing. I think that is a perfectly acceptable thing. And maybe that sounds highfalutin and you know arrogant, or someone's got a Jesus complex or something. But no, I've learned from working with these medicines that they connect us with our purpose. They awaken our social concern. They awaken our ecological conscience. Um, and they can do that. And there's no turning back. And there's no turning back. And so I think that what I've learned going to the most going to the last pristine reefs on Earth in Raja Ampat, which are these islands off the coast of New Guinea in Indonesia. And I went there before I ever worked with ayahuasca. And you're right. I write about this in Mothership, and and that was, as a gay man, growing up in the deep South, I didn't feel comfortable at church, for obvious reasons, but I felt comfortable on Florida's reefs, dead and diseased as they were when I showed up when I was 9. I felt that was my church, that was my cathedral, that was my place where I connected with the secret. And then to go to these reefs 10,000 miles from my family of origin, by the way, very handy, to go to these reefs and commune with these creatures who build an ecosystem that can be seen from space, right? These reefs are the most biodiverse in the entire world, in Raja Ampat. To be there on these reefs that were thriving during global mass bleaching events it felt like a miracle, because it was a miracle to be there. Again, 10,000 miles from where I grew up. That felt very safe. No Wi-Fi, no phone signal. And so, being there on the reefs, I did feel vulnerable. And I bonded with those creatures. I bonded with manta rays and moray eels and giant clams and barrel sponges and sassy, drop dead gorgeous coral that was just absolutely incredible. And people can check out my Instagram to see some photos of this place. So unlike what I couldn't do with people, I could bond with coral reefs, with the creatures of coral reefs, and I could feel vulnerable and feel like we were in communion, that we were in relationship, because we were in relationship. They were looking at me with their eye spots made of uric acid. People don't know this, but coral can actually they have a visual, rudimentary visual apparatus, and of course I've got my peepers, and so we would look at each other, and and we would be in relationship with one another. And so being in relationship means, doesn't always mean cupcakes and cartwheels, right? We feel lots of emotions when we're in relationship with others, with other beings. And so what came up for me was pain. Pain came up. Like I could feel pain. I could feel, I knew what we had done to coral reefs around the world. I knew what we were doing to the oceans. I knew that the coral in my home state of Florida was down to 1% coral coverage on the ocean floor. I mean, it's just like mind-boggling, the destruction that's happened in the Western Hemisphere. And then to be there, even in Raja Ampat, with these relatively pristine reefs, right? You could see the places where fishermen from elsewhere had come in and used dynamite to destroy, blow up the reef. And then the fish, because their swim bladders are ruptured from the explosion, they come to the surface and then they grab the fish and go. Like I could see that. I could see some diseased coral. I could see the effects of some warmer temperatures in this location. And so to be in relationship with something so beautiful that's also so endangered and so imperiled, that, and spending so much time in silence with these creatures, like so many days and weeks, I was there sleeping on the floors of huts. And I mean, it was a great way to flee my triggers and my addiction, right? So I'm there, and so that ecological compassion was awakened in me. But you don't need to go to Indonesia, 10,000 miles away, to do this. You can go to your public park. You can go in your garden. You can go anywhere and experience nature and be in relationship with it. So I think that the reefs felt sacramental. It felt sacred to be there because it was. And I met God there face to face. I met Mother Earth there face to face. And I got to meet Mother Earth again face to face when I went to the Amazon, and the entity of Madre Ayahuasca would appear to me, and she remothered me, and she had tough love too to offer. And so she has shown me, as maybe many people, as you and others can probably relate to, she shows us visions of she shows us apocalyptic visions. She shows us ecological collapse. She and then we have to feel that panic. We have to feel that panic of visions of Vladimir Putin and the nuclear arsenals and this and that, and what the world will feel like in 50 years because of climate change. Like all these things are manifest to us sometimes in our journeys, and we feel panic. But that is not panic that is unwarranted, and it's not panic that is from the past, right? Because I felt plenty of panic involving my family of origin and the abuse that I suffered there. But those are emotional flashbacks. What ayahuasca can also offer us is helping us to remember the future. It's an anti-amnesic for the future too. And so we remember the future. I know that sounds like a paradox, because it is, because we think time is linear, but it's not. So we're having ecological flash forwards, and we feel panic, and we also have to learn to tolerate that. We also have to learn to tolerate that, because we are going to be called to serve in the coming years in an even more intense way, and we're going to have our shit together to help people as things begin to heat up more and more, both climactically and socially / politically. And so it's a training ground for the future. So it's an eco sacrament, but it's also, I guess, an eco dojo. I know you're in martial arts. I know I'm not. Miss Piggy Miss Piggy does karate. That's about as much as I know about martial arts. But it's like these ayahuasca ceremonies are also eco dojos. Like they're teaching us to um to care about the earth, but also defend the earth. It's like when we're on a dieta, maybe you've had this experience, Jason, where you're on a dieta and you hear the chainsaws of the illegal loggers in the distance, and you're on the medicine and you're vulnerable and you're in your hut. What are you going to do? You've got you have to keep listening to those chainsaws. There's nothing you can do. There's nowhere you can run. And you're face to face with what we're doing, this extraction mindset, this ecocidal urge, right? I said I was on a suicidal path. But our species is as well. And so ayahuasca as an eco sacrament puts us in touch with not only what we can do to help, but how we're hurting the planet, how we are also on a suicidal, ecocidal path, which is the definition of insanity. Like if I set fire to my own house, that you would put me in an institution if I did that. Well, that's what we're doing to the planet. Pretty dumb. And so ayahuasca can do some of these things for us, as in, and not only as trauma medicine, but as eco sacrament.
What do you feel are ways out of that? Do you
Yeah.
think plants like ayahuasca are like essential in that way to begin to allow us to heal ourselves, and as we heal ourselves, we begin to be better caregivers, better carriers
Yeah.
of how we live? Because certainly, I think a lot of people would also see that what
Mm-hmm.
I do to myself, I do to others, and it's also part of
Mm-hmm.
these ideas that I think a lot of people begin to see or experience when they speak
Mm-hmm.
about things aren't separate. I think one of the really powerful things about these plant medicines is it does begin to take us inside, see
Mm-hmm.
how our stories do affect us and therefore
Mm-hmm.
how they affect others. What do you see from your time in the ocean? What do you see from your time with ayahuasca as a path? Because I think it's something a lot of people recognize,
Yeah.
whether it's in themselves or in the world. Something is not quite right. I'm not quite happy. I'm lacking something. I'm missing something. The earth is lacking something. The earth is missing something. They
Uh-huh.
feel stuck. They don't know where to go. They don't
Right.
necessarily have a guiding light. They don't necessarily have a path forward.
Right.
Do you
Mm-hmm.
find there are things that people can begin to do to begin to work with that angst, to work with that fear?
Mm. Yeah, I think that um I think maybe the first thing I would say is that um and this is a very euphemistic way to put it, but the future is going to be very dynamic. The future is there. It is going to be lots of changes are in store for us as a species, as a civilization, as a planet. The world will be unrecognizable in 10 or 15 years. Now, that isn't to scare people. That isn't to say it will be a hellscape or something like that. It's just going to be different, right? We have what I think it's El Salvador, right, has adopted Bitcoin as its currency. I mean, you know, in 10 years, 15 years, you're going to have an android who's going to be folding your laundry if you choose. Like things are really going to change. Life is going to become, culture is going to become really unrecognizable in a lot of ways, especially as human beings merge with technology alongside, a deteriorating environmental uh, uh, situation, deteriorating environment. So so I guess one of the things I would say is that yes, ayahuasca allows us or teaches us, right? It's this, as I said, it creates this space that is an eco dojo. It's a training ground for flexibility, for ecologic, for civilizational flexibility, because we have to be able to adapt, right? We cannot, just as we cannot restore the planet to what it was, to when you and I were, young boys, um, you know, we are where we are, and things are changing, and the Amazon is being deforested, and the Amazon is drying out slowly but surely, or quickly, depending on your vantage point. Like, this is happening. We're in a global mass bleaching event right now of coral reefs again. This was the warmest March in on record in human history that we just came out of, and the warmest year in recorded history too, 2023. So, like, things are changing, and so I always think back to Shiva. I always think back to Om Trayambakam Yajamehe Sukhandim Pushtevardhanam, that chant, which can best be symbolized this way: just hands up, fingers out, not grasping, just come what may, I surrender, like letting go. Because I think that we have to use these medicines. We should use these medicines to be adaptable, to think in more creative ways, to think in kind of to engage in, as the scientists like to call it, divergent thinking, thinking outside the box. We have to be creative. We have to find creative ways to build community in a world that is so all about Zoom and emails and text messages, as opposed to in the flesh, community. And so we have to learn to be really flexible and really creative in doing those things. And ayahuasca can teach us to do those things alongside great communities, right? That are offering these medicines, that are upholding those values. And I would say too that so ayahuasca can teach us to be adaptable, and also it awakens the helper in us. And so that is, I think, part of one of the ways that we can deal with eco-anxiety, deal with eco-anguish, is by helping, right? Is by helping. And so, for me, that means voting. For me, that means writing Mothership and coming here and talking about it. For me, it means teaching at my university and teaching my students about some of these concepts. For other people, it means, facilitating plant medicine ceremonies, having a podcast, being in loving relationship with as many people as possible, trying to reduce your carbon footprint as much as possible, trying to live simply. Are all those things going to save the earth? I don't think so. What needs to happen is a rapid drawdown of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases at the end of the day. So that has to happen. And so people also, the part of being a helper also for some people is taking on systems, taking on institutions, taking on deeply entrenched systems like big oil, right? Who have lied to us, who created this whole concept of the carbon footprint, the personal carbon footprint, and that I need to feel so guilty about this carbon footprint that I have. Well, that's a distraction from the carbon footprint that Exxon, BP, and Shell and others have, right? Like, they don't want us to point the finger at them. They'd like us to feel bad about ourselves. And so there've got to be people who are it's boots on the ground activism, who are taking on these systems and these powerful institutions that have a vested interest in taking, in not keeping those fossil fuels in the ground that are currently in the ground. And, I think there's about $1 trillion worth of petroleum in the ground, and there are plenty of people who want to extract that and make money off of it. as people do. So ayahuasca can get us to be savvy activists. It can get us to be savvy business people. It's not just sort of the patchouli and sage smudging crowd that ayahuasca can affect and activate this compassionate heart. To be compassionate, sure, there's the quivering of the heart in response to suffering. That's part of compassion. But the other part of compassion is direct action. And for each of us, direct action takes a different form. And so this is not to say that ayahuasca should be, be in school lunches or should be compulsory or anything like that for people, or that everyone should somehow take it. No, because if enough people engage deeply with these medicines, there will be change, and that and so there is a paradigm shift happening right now. We're living that, Jason, right? As you know, and your podcast is a manifestation of that. My book is a manifestation of that. Our life's work, is our respective life work is a manifestation of that. And so, like, it's happening. It's just also, we've got to stop emitting greenhouse gases. Not in 5 years, not in 10 years, not in 2050, but today. And unfortunately, that's not happening. And so this is, so I think that, one way to deal with this, with the sadness and the hopelessness that comes up, is to do something, right? Is to do something. And so that is, being a helper, trying to do something is important, is really, really, really important. And connecting with nature, right? Connecting with nature. When you get really eco-anxious, you get really eco-anguished, just go out into nature. Hold, just be in front of a flower and look at the flower. Look at the bumblebee. Not for 2 seconds, for 10 minutes, for 20 minutes. Be with that tree. Be with that bumblebee. Soothe yourself with the breeze. Soothe yourself with the sound of water. And find a place you can float, right? I've been to the ocean many times. Maybe you have a pond near your house, or the ocean is near your house, or even a swimming pool, right? Find a place to float and just let yourself be held by water. All of these things help us reconnect with the 4 elements, help us reconnect with nature, and that helps bring our cortisol levels down, helps us put our lives into perspective, because remember, we are tiny. And remember that this, and this is not, some people aren't going to like me to say this, but here I go. The climate crisis might be the best thing that's ever happened to humanity. Might be the best thing that's ever happened, because it separates the wheat from the chaff. The wheat from the chaff, right? It shows us what we're made of. Are we up to the challenge of surviving, not prevailing, right? Let's leave prevailing to the side for a second. Are we up to the task of surviving? And community will be as essential to that as any seawall or solar farm. And so, are we up to the challenge? And what kind of evolution of consciousness can happen in the great squeeze, right? The bottleneck that climate change is, not will, is producing. What will come out of us walking through this gauntlet? And it's possible that the best of humanity will come forth, will be called forth. The best of humanity will be called forth, and we can maybe stop being Homo sapiens, and maybe we'll be something else. I hope. I'd like to have maybe a different genus and species for us, because we need an upgrade, and plant medicines are one way to accelerate that process, right? To accelerate that process, because it needs to be accelerated.
Well, beautiful, Greg. That sounds like a good way to begin wrapping up. We're at 2 hours, and I know we're reaching
Oh
the
my
end of it.
Lord.
Is sometimes it goes by.
So much
Uh,
fun.
yeah. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you feel you'd still like to share with our guests? Any topics or anything on your mind?
Just love. Just love. That's, I guess I just want to end. And we were talking about death and destruction and things there for a little while, but I think just the importance of love, right? And the importance of, again, dropping the storyline, and whether that's a civilizational, future tripping storyline, doom and gloom storyline, or a more personal one, like just I'm just I'm so grateful for these medicines, for allowing me to learn to love again, and to learn how to hold myself and others in love. Not perfectly, not all the time. I've got a shit list. I promise it is long still. Um, I can't help it. It's there, but just I just want to end with just saying that, love is, maybe, if love isn't the answer, it's one of the answers. One of the well, it's definitely in the top three. And um, and I just think, let's just continue to practice together, being here now, and being in love, and spreading the love, and don't let anyone take your radiance from you. Don't let anyone take your radiance from you. Your radiance is yours, and actually can't be taken from you. You'll find your way back to it if you feel like it's been eclipsed.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. If people are interested in buying your book, Mothership, or I don't know
Sure,
if they can reach out to you or talking to you, or what are ways that they can do that, or contact you,
sure.
or learn more about you?
Well, you can go to my website, gregwrenn.com. That's GregWrenn.com. Or you can find me on Instagram, Greg, the letter J, Wrenn, Wrenn. I'm on there. And, I'd love to hear from people. And I'd love to know what your roadmap for healing has been. And because there may be ways in which our stories are intertwined. So I'm really excited, because I think my next book would be one that might look outward even more, and really really incorporate other people's experiences, transformational experiences with ayahuasca, and how it activates, ecological concerns. So I do want to hear from people. So, and of course the book is available on Amazon. The audiobook is coming out. It's available at your independent bookstore. Everywhere you could find it, it should be there. It's distributed by Simon and Schuster. And I should say too, one last thing, that 10% of my book profits are going to go to the Nature Conservancy. Um, so there is a philanthropic aspect to Mothership, and so I'm grateful for everyone's support as best they can.
Wonderful, Greg. Well, thank you so much for sharing. You have
Oh,
a beautiful
Jason.
story, a beautiful presence, and it takes a lot of courage to share your story, to write a book. I think it's not an easy thing. Even working with these plants takes a lot of courage. So I really commend you for that, and just for coming on, for sharing, for doing your work, and I really wish you the best. And I hope some people reach out and purchase your book, and just wish you all the best. And if you ever
Oh,
do write
Jason.
volume number two, you're always more than welcome.
Oh, I've really enjoyed meeting you over the interwebs like this, and I hope to maybe someday our paths will cross. And this podcast is such an inspiration to a lot of people, and it's just so well done. And so it's a real honor to be here, and so thank you for what you do. Thank you for being you.
Well, you're a fellow Virginian now, so maybe one day our
Yes,
paths will cross.
indeed.
And Virginia is for lovers, so your final message is you're in the right place.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. I really appreciate you and appreciate your time.
Appreciate you, Jason. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. That's it. I hope you enjoyed that episode. For me, it was really a pleasure to have Greg on to share about his story, what he's been through, how he's overcome that, his work with ayahuasca. I think it's really a beautiful story. And as I said, I think it takes a lot of courage to share that. So I think that's it. As I said in the beginning, if you're interested in working with myself, we're going to be in Portugal and then Canada and then probably towards the end of the year potentially back in Peru. So working with these plants, going deeper into processes, especially through the dieta, really healing and learning directly from these plants. That's a really beautiful opportunity. I'll put a link to those in the show notes. And as always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help to me. Patreon is a really good option. It's a website. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. There's different tiers you can sign up for. Those tiers give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. To all the people who are supporting, thank you very much for your help. I really appreciate it. And if you're able to help, thank you in advance. If you're not able to do that, as always, just doing some of the small things to help with the algorithms is really beneficial. So if you're viewing this on Rumble or YouTube, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, those things are really helpful. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review. So I think that's it. I'm not exactly sure the order of my next guests, although I do have a woman coming on to speak about more of the Celtic traditions. So that should be a really good episode. And after that, I'm still unsure. But as always, I hope this finds you all well. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you all on the next episode.
Dung